Okay, going to start this video before the response even gets going, in case this is looked back on again to lambaste me or crucify me on the altar of the far leftist ideology. I am not a conservative. Just wanted to make sure that was known.
Spoiler alert, mental illness doesn't cause gun violence.
Spoiler alert, guns do not cause gun violence. People do. Moving on.
I could talk about how on average there is more than one mass shooting per day in the United States, or how it's statistically proven that gun regulation curbs gun violence, or how I'm fucking tired of conservatives saying that it's too soon to talk about gun legislation after a major tragedy because they really just want us to forget about it and move on.
Okay, 133 mass shootings. That's not enough for one a day. Don't think you know how averages work. However, that was blatantly disingenuous in an attempt to fearmonger. Also, that's from your own source, Vox, which, in that regard, if you want your point to be considered noteworthy for future reference, do not use Vox. However, that aside, it's not just conservatives that say this or act this way. Many people of all political leanings do, because when it happens, it's always with the intent to further restrict laws and regulations on the heels of a tragedy. Now, people don't like that because, well, they can see through it. But with that, I'm not saying you can't make it political. Of course you can. But the reality is, leftists like yourself wait like vultures for these opportunities, and most people can see through that. It's just, people don't like having politics cawed so close to a tragedy because, well, quite frankly, it makes it seem like the people that are acting like vultures don't care about the victims and only want to push their agenda. Now, I'm not saying that you don't care about victims. I'm not going to assume anything about you because I don't know you as an individual. I'm just saying that is how it comes across. But we'll leave out the little tidbit where the Sutherland shooter should have been barred from owning a gun entirely due to being dishonorably discharged for domestic abuse. The error on the side of government allowed him to slip through the cracks and purchase a firearm. Now, about your statistically proven to curb violence claim, in reality, it doesn't. I point to this statistic here, showing that Finland and Norway have higher fatality rates due to gun violence per 100K than the US. Now, this is mass shootings, mind you. Despite Norway and Finland having gun regulations, Norway far more stringent than the US, and to this source here from Pew Research showing off that while gun sales have gone up, gun-related violence has decreased. And another little thing I'd like to mention. So imagine this being a little side note whenever mass shootings comes up in a Second Amendment debate. There is no legal definition of mass shooting. So while you may be, and I quote, fucking tired of conservatives saying it's too soon to talk about gun violence, I rebuttal that with, I'm getting rather irritated by people such as yourself being oblivious to why some people might think differently than you. After all, I don't see a statistic on how regulations curb gun violence in your fucking description box. However, moving on.
What I want to talk about today is the way that we frame mental illness in conversations about gun violence. And in case all you liberals think you're off the hook here, y'all are part of the problem too. So for pretty much the entire time I've been alive and have been hearing about conversations about gun control and gun violence, mental illness has almost always been used as a scapegoat.
First things first, you're the most liberal person ever. Of all time. Seems like a pretty hefty thing to claim, just saying. But here's a little side note, Marina. Mass shooters tend to be a little unhinged. After all, no mentally stable person would commit a mass shooting. It's not a scapegoat, it's a fact. However, I could argue that you're using firearms as a scapegoat instead of dealing with the fact that some people are just, well, messed up in the head. After all, guns aren't the only things you can kill with. Now, I could make the argument here that if an individual has their mind set on doing evil things, much like you see in Europe now between the vehicle attacks and bombings, removing firearms won't solve the problem. They will simply use a different utensil. And I can make this argument with suicide as well, that if an individual has their mind set on suicide, simply taking the firearm away from them isn't going to do it. They'll just commit suicide through other means. And also, gun regulation only applies to people that follow the law. Criminals don't tend to follow the law. And people that want to murder large numbers of people for a political or ideological reason tend to find other means.
They become murderers. You know, I pride myself on not being a murderer, but apparently if I'm ever given a gun, the bloodlust is just gonna take control of me. But of course, this is not just a Democratic problem. I've seen conservatives argue these talking points as well. Actually, on Monday during a news conference, Trump said,
I think that mental health is your problem here. We have a lot of mental health problems in our country, as do other countries. But this isn't a guns situation. This is a mental health problem at the highest level.
Gun control advocates were, of course, quick to point out the hypocrisy in Trump's statements, since he rolled back a regulation in February that would have made it harder for mentally ill people to purchase guns.
If you are referring to the legislation that he rolled back that barred people from receiving Social Security checks for mental illnesses, I have a little breakaway for you on that. Social Security isn't exactly the most uptight about what constitute mental issues, as seen here. So while he may be rolling this back, I see no issue with that whatsoever. After all, we don't want people with mental issues to be stigmatized now, do we? Or can I only use the SJW backwards logic if I'm arguing for you instead of against you? Anyway, I don't know what the stipulation is on that. Once again, the mass shooters we are talking about definitely have mental health issues. And I can deduce this because, as you implied, simply having a mental health issue doesn't make you or myself a murderer. But I see no error in logic to tie these evil people with having mental issues. Unless you're trying to say that haphazardly killing innocents isn't a clear sign you're a little messed up in the head. I mean, like I said, I don't know you as a person, but I think you'd have enough self-awareness and mental capacity to be like, yeah, that person that just went out and murdered a bunch of people, they're probably not right in the head. But alas, let's continue this circus.
Violence is not a product of mental illness. Violence is a product of anger. When we cannot modulate anger, it will control our behavior. Anyway,
violence is usually caused by anger. I can agree with you on there, but there's a big difference between throwing punches because somebody cut you off in traffic versus premeditating a mass murder. In no way, shape, or form outside of boiling it down to violence could you say that those two examples equate each other. Anger is a direct response to something that happened, and most level-headed people, and even people with mental health issues, myself included, can usually get over the knee-jerk reaction of wanting to break someone's neck because of some dumb reason. The Vegas shooter, while the motive still remains relatively unknown, as well as the motives of the Sutherland shooter, a lot of people can unilaterally agree that these people weren't of sound mental states. And pointing it out doesn't mean I am saying they did this solely because they were mentally ill. I am saying that the mental health is part of the package. So, Marina, a rebuttal to your video in general, I will stop noting that people that do evil things like mass shootings, as I said, noting, not blaming, have mental issues. If you stop saying that mass shootings are caused by inanimate amalgamation of steel and other parts. However, in closing, I know that having mental health doesn't mean you're going to be a mass shooter. I'm not daft. I just ask that this kind of logic be applied evenly everywhere, and that people of Marina's persuasion need to realize the hypocrisy of hashtag not all mental health, while in the same breath blaming all guns. God knows I loathe the hypocrite. And to that same effect, it's funny to me that these people, when they do this and they have the hypocrisy, they don't realize it, and when it's brought up to them, they either simply turn a blind eye or completely disavow what you just said. No, that's not true. It comes in, it's sort of mentality. But it isn't like you could say that I disagree with her in the general sense that we shouldn't say that mental health is the only reason why these people did these things. There are obviously other reasons. I'm not saying I disagree with her there. However, I am not going to go as far as she did and say that mental health has nothing to fucking do with it. Because as I've mentioned a million times in this video already, not literally a million, I mean, I'm exaggerating for effect, that an individual has to have some form of mental issue or be mentally unhinged in some way to act out and kill multiple people. That is not that I should be able to say that to you, Marina, and you should be able to be like, all right, I can see where you're coming from because logically it makes sense. However, I am just about done with this, and well, quite frankly, I didn't get anywhere near as angry as I thought I was going to get, so color me surprised. I also managed to not call her cunt, which, aside from the one I just used there, be my first almost cunt-free video. Now, with that said, I'm going to end this video here, and I do response videos on Tuesdays, I do rants on Thursdays, and and if you liked, please like and subscribe, and I will see you glorious cunts Thursday.